Good evening everyone and welcome to Stratford-on-Avon District Council Planning Committee. My name is Councillor Lewis Adam, I'm your chairman for this evening. I'll just run through some housekeeping. There's no fire drill planned for this evening, so if it does go off, please make an ordinary exit. The muster point is the car park by the pub across the road. Please make sure your phones are in silent mode or turned off so they don't disturb the flow of the meeting. This is a meeting in public, not a public meeting, so only those registered to speak will be permitted to do so. I'll call you up at the correct time and give you further instructions thereon, and it will be recorded and broadcast on the website. I'll just introduce our top table. From Democratic Services, we've got Kira Keller. Our solicitor this evening is Sue Mullins. Our planning manager is Alice Cosnett, and our planning officers are Stuart McIver, Paul Thompson and Josh Cooper. And Alice, I believe you have a statement you've prepared.
Yes, thank you, Chair. My role is to provide impartial advice and to assist members in their decision taking.
Thank you very much. We can move on to the agenda then. Item 1, apologies for absence.
We have apologies from Councillor Padgham.
Thank you very much. Item 2, disclosures of interest. Any disclosures? Councillor Scorer.
Thank you, Chair. A non-pecuniary interest. I'm a parish councillor at Kyneton, but I've withdrew myself when the parish discussed the application at Rising Fields Farm. Also, I'm the ward member, but I haven't made a comment, and I come with a clear and open mind.
Thank you very much. Any further disclosures from members? I have one myself on item 3. I became aware as a neighbouring ward member or thereabouts of enforcement action on this site at the time, just through association with something in my ward. However, I was not privy to any information with regards to this application. I come with an open mind. Yes, Councillor Scorer.
Sorry, Chair. I'm known to the applicant for Rising Fields Farm as well, and also that I've had correspondence from him as well.
Okay. Do you come
Yeah,
with
and
an open mind?
I come with a clear and open mind.
Okay, lovely. Thank you very much. Any other members? No? Very good. Okay, we can move on then to our first item of this evening, application 23/01027/FUL, land triangular plot to the north of Windmill Lane, Ladbroke. Our presenting officer is Stuart McIver. Once you're ready, take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Good evening, everyone. So the proposal before members is a change of use from agricultural to equestrian and the erection of a stable building comprising of 2 stables and a feed tack room, a triangular plot of land to the north of Windmill Lane, Ladbroke. Members may remember that this application was deferred in October last year to enable an assessment from an independent consultant on the suitability of the use of the land for equestrian purposes and to ascertain whether the size of the proposed associated stable building is appropriate. This assessment has taken place and is addressed in the committee report. So the application site is denoted on the black dot on the map on the screen in front of you. You can see the application site outlined in red and is located to the north of Windmill Lane. So we have the existing and proposed site plans. You can see the proposed stable building is to be sited here. And then we have the proposed elevations of the stable building. The dimensions are a height of 3.5 metres, a width of 13.3 metres, and a depth of 5.8 metres. Materials include timber shiplap cladding. And then we go on to the proposed floor plan. And then we move on to some site photos. So you've got a map to the right of the photo with a red arrow which is to denote where the photo was taken from. So this first photo was taken from Windmill Lane looking southeast towards the application site. You can see the application site here. And then we've got another photo taken from Windmill Lane, but looking northeast. And then again, we've got another photo taken from Windmill Lane, but looking northwest, looking directly at the access into the site. So Again, another photo, site photo. So this is actually within the application site, again, looking north. So this is looking northwest, back towards Wimble Lane. And then we've got another photo within the application site looking south. And then we've got a final site photo looking southwest from within the application site. So for reference, the proposed stable block would be sited around here, directly adjacent to another building which is on a separate parcel of land just outside the application site. So in summary, it's considered that the proposed change of use from agricultural to equestrian and the erection of the stable building comprising of 2 stables and a feed tack room complies with the requirements of the development plan and is sustainable development. It is therefore recommended that the application is granted. Please see the update sheet for updates. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Okay, we'll now move on then to our first speaker, who is Councillor Judy Groves of Ladbroke Parish Council. Good evening, Councillor. No, that's fine. It's the button on the right-hand side, if you take a seat. Once the light is red, the microphone's live. You have 3 minutes. I'm happy to give you a 30-second warning before your time expires. And otherwise, once you're ready, take it away. Yep,
Is that
that's good.
okay, everybody? Yeah, thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. 6 months ago, we left this room cautiously optimistic. The committee was unanimous in wanting to refuse this application as we had clearly demonstrated it was and still is a Trojan horse for development. Whilst considerable equine knowledge existed in planning members present, it was agreed to commission a specialist report to independently confirm the unsuitability of the land for grazing horses. The resulting Kernan Countryside Consultants report following a site visit is crystal clear in concluding that, in inverted commas, the land is not suitable or safe for the grazing of horses. Councillor Holloway and myself walked the site as recently as last Friday, and nothing has changed land-wise other than a light veil of weedy grass, hardly surprising over the 8 months that's elapsed. I've got some photographs up there. We walked it, we scraped it, and it is hardcore underneath the solid. But worryingly, whilst the land situation and unsuitability hasn't changed one jot, 5 water standpipes have been installed around the site, and National Grid shut the lane for 2 days to install power in a small brick building away from the proposed building. If we look to the foundations of planning law and process, this application, simply put, should not even be under consideration. It's asking for something that's impossible to deliver. The land is no longer agricultural. Hedgerows have been ripped out, high fences have been erected, replacing post and rail traditional for paddocks, and tons of hardcore have been dumped on the site. And it's definitely not safe or suitable for horses, as per the independent consultants now. The building size is questionable, and the boundaries, whilst unbelievably excluded from consideration, are not horse or paddock friendly, quite the opposite. The land is perfect for development, and any application should reflect actual intent and reality. However, having the concern and welfare of our residents at heart, after 12 months of watching and waiting to see caravans roll up their lane, we are prepared to withdraw our application, providing one very important condition around land remediation is added to those already put forward. Namely, that the applicant must restore the land to its pre-development ready agricultural condition. We firmly believe that everyone here is equally minded to find a way through the planning system to uphold the sentiments of our local plan, to protect the well-being of our residents, and indeed to do all we can to avert the horrendous social and financial burden of leaving this site unenforced and open to incursion. Thank you. Did I make it? Just.
Well within your time. Thank you very much.
Can I just quickly, nothing to do with this, can I just thank Councillor Ostrander, who can't be here today because of personal reasons.
It is noted, thank you.
And Councillor Rock, who has kindly stood in to cover her speech. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. No, much appreciated. Members, if you hold on just 1 second, I'll just see if the members have any questions. Yes, Councillor Hench-Seraphin.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening.
Evening.
Can you tell me what the land was used for before this?
Yes, there was one sad little pony wandering around in quite an overgrown area, but it did have grass then, and it wasn't covered in hardcore.
Yeah, I could see no
Yeah,
grass.
and a rotten old fall down stable. But do you know what? It was happy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, Councillor Harvey.
Good evening. The photographs you've taken or displayed this evening showing a certain amount of rubble and concrete, etc. Can you confirm that that was a photograph taken this week?
The photographs we just showed, I was with Councillor Holloway, we took them on Friday.
Fine, thank you.
Councillor Keithley.
Thanks very much, Councillor. In your submission, you said you would like a condition to reinstate the development to agricultural condition. Can you tell me your experience in respect of all this hardcore that's come in? I'm not familiar with the site.
Okay. So the tricky thing we've had with this is evidence, because I'd love to have pictures of all the lorries that trekked up and down that lane. By the time people had realised in the middle of the night, we hadn't got pictures. Anyway, conservatively, we think about 20 lorry loads of hardcore or more went up and down that lane. The hedgerows were all ripped up, as we all know. The boundaries are excluded from this presentation for obvious reasons, because they bear no resemblance to the paddocks in the area whatsoever, and are anti-horses. So what's happened is that, and it's still hardcore because I nearly broke a heel on Friday night trying to walk over it, and pulling up roots is just like a child's play. There's nothing underneath except hardcore. So what's happened is, what was an ancient paddock that had a dozy pony on it has become effectively ready for building. And that's the state of play.
I'll stop you there.
Yeah,
So,
okay.
I take your question's been answered.
Only a quick supplementary question to
Yes,
this in respect of you mentioned that you had no evidence of this material coming in, but had you any idea as to when it came in? Are we talking 2 or 3 years ago or recently?
Oh, no, it came in since the site was acquired about a year ago. Forgive me, I haven't got the exact date. Since the site was acquired, I would say around the beginning of April, and I know this because I was in hospital for a major operation, the very day that all the hedgerows were ripped out. Yeah,
Thank
so
you.
that's when all the devastation started.
Any further questions for our parish council representative? No. Thank you very much for your contribution
Happy
this
to come
evening.
back. We're passionate about this one.
Thank you,
everybody.
much appreciated. Moving on then to our final speaker for this application, Councillor Rock on behalf of Councillor Ostrander, ward member. Good evening, Councillor.
Good evening. I think it's been touched on by way of explanation. Councillor Ostrander has had to leave the country because of a family illness, and she's asked me to speak on her behalf. I think it's also worth saying that I was the ward member prior to the last council elections, so I have some familiar both with the case and the site. So I may be able to answer questions, even though I'm just reading somebody else's script. In particular, the question that's just asked, I can provide some dates.
Duly noted. Thank you,
Thank you.
Councillor, on that. Yes. So
So I'm reading the words that Councillor Ostrander has given me. When I presented to the committee on this matter in October last year, I used the expression, if it looks like a duck, swims like a duck, and quacks like a duck, then it probably is a duck. I went on to make the case that this land does not look to be set up for the stated equestrian purpose. The committee concluded that a specialist report was required to determine if this land was fit for equestrian use. The resulting specialist report shows that the committee was wise to ask for this, and I hope you have all had a chance to study the Kernan Countryside Consultant's report. It clearly rejects this proposal on numerous grounds, including an opinion that the land is not agricultural to begin with. Kernans visited the application site on the 17th of January. During their site visit, they noted the site comprised small rounds of rubble with large sections of bricks, pottery and broken glass. The ground conditions were compact with limited grass growth. Kernans consider that owing to the ground and site conditions, it is not suitable or safe for the grazing of horses. This situation has not changed since January, and I respectfully suggest that the case officer's visit this month, where he concluded that the ground is in a better state to that in January, when Kernans visited, is misleading and based simply on the fact that weeds have grown over much of the ground. It still has hardcore rubble and glass and does not support the sward needed for equestrian purposes. It is not safe as per CS9 B7. Furthermore, the site has had drainage installed, numerous standpipes for water have emerged, and most recently a brick structure with electrical outlets has appeared that is nowhere near the proposed stable buildings. This is not a typical equestrian setup, and it does not even include the close-boarded fence surrounding the site, which has now been questionably excluded from the application, nor the hedges and trees damaged during the nesting season to erect the fence. This is undoubtedly a complex case that officers have had to grapple with. Enforcement has been involved. This has resulted in long waits and much anxiety for the residents of Ladbroke, as well as many emails between myself and the officers involved. Nonetheless, the bottom line is that this committee in October last year felt that an expert opinion was needed to ascertain if the land was suitable for equestrian. The unequivocal response from those experts is no. I would therefore respectfully ask that the committee, if they are not minded to refuse the application, that they strongly consider, at minimum, a condition of remediation of the land to make it fit for the grazing of horses. I note there are concerns about the size of the stable block in relation to the intended size and use of the holding. This has not been assisted by the lack of information or late information about the type of horses to be kept. And I note there's something on the update sheet for that, which obviously Sue didn't know about. Noting that situation, the application should be refused on the grounds of design and suitability for the purpose stated in the application. And the Kernans have something to say about the sizes there as well. Policy CS9 requires high quality design, includes comments about materials, the provision of landscaping and ongoing management and maintenance. Also sensitivity to the setting, the landscape character, topography of the site and locality. AS10 first bullet point repeats this in letter and spirit. Given a previous treatment of the land, a condition requiring its remediation prior to the change of use would seem to meet the test. Either the application is invalid because the area is not agricultural, which is what Kernans state, or the ground is unsuitable and the size of the holding and or stable block is wrong. Depending on your decision, I know that officers are concerned that the authority might be perceived to have acted unreasonably. However, having taken the trouble to commission a report at the authority's own costs and noting the difficulty in obtaining relevant information, your refusal of the application or requiring stringent conditions seems entirely reasonable. Such conditions would be to remediate the ground by removing the waste material, having appropriate boundary treatment, prevent the storage of caravans and vehicles, both having been introduced to the site in recent times.
Thank you very much, and well within your time. Members, do we have any questions for our substitute ward member? No, nothing forthcoming.
Chairman, just through you, I do know the answer to Councillor Keithley's question. If that's not improper.
That's good to know. Unless Councillor Keithley is willing to raise it again with yourself, I think it's improper. Councillor Keithley.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'd like to ask you, thank you, Councillor Rock. I'd like to ask you again the question I raised in respect of the importation of these materials.
Okay, so this case and the changes that took place on the site occurred in the last sort of 6 or 8 weeks before the elections, with when it was removed from what was then my ward in Ladbroke. And the fence was erected at that point. So it was in the 6 or 8 weeks before the elections, which I think were in May of last year.
Thank you very much. Yes, Councillor Pascoe.
Has there been any reason given as to why the hardcore was put there? Somebody had it to get rid of it or something like that. Was there any further reason, any reason known why the hardcore was put there?
Well, I'll defer to planning enforcement, but a stop notice was applied to the site to prevent further changes of that nature. But presumably planning enforcement made those inquiries. I hadn't had any interactions with the applicant.
And it's just worth noting that planning enforcement is not something we can consider with regards to this. Any further questions? Councillor Keithley?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, Councillor Rock, you mentioned when you read out Councillor Ostrander's submission that this land was not agricultural in your view. Can you explain to me why you've come to that conclusion?
Because it says so in the Kernan's report, which I have here.
Right, okay, thank you. It says so in that report.
Yeah.
Thanks very much.
Any further questions? No, in which case, thank you very much, Councillor Rock. Okay, we'll move on then to points of clarification from our officers. Are any points? Yes, Councillor Holmes first.
Thank you, Chair. In the officer's report on page 13, in the fifth paragraph, where it says the site is not so small or of such unacceptable condition to mean that horses could not / would be stabled and graze on the land. Could the officers highlight what the sort of threshold is for that, and whether this application was considered anywhere near close to reaching any sort of threshold for not being suitable?
So we as officers can only assess applications against the development plan and material planning considerations. The size of the application site and whether that is suitable for a suitable size for the grazing of horses is not a planning consideration, it's not a material planning consideration. So unfortunately I wouldn't be able to give you any kind of guidance in terms of what would be an acceptable size.
So yeah, sorry, just say more in terms of like the impact that that's been said from the hardcore and the quality of the grazing. Does that have any material impact? Thank you.
I think it's all sufficiently covered in the report, in my view. So page 7 talks about the suitability of the site and the size of the site in terms of grazing, and then pages 8 and 9 deal with the design of the stables and the size of the stable. So it's all sufficiently covered in your report.
Thank you. Councillor Keithley?
Thank you, Chair. Got a couple of questions, please, to clarify. So the first question is in respect of what I've heard from Councillor Groves, that there was 20 lorry loads of construction waste brought onto the site, which is around 400 tonnes. So my first question is, do we know whether or not that was an illegal deposition, or whether or not that was in accordance with the legislation that allows that sort of quantity to come in of construction waste? That's the first question. The second question, if I may, I've just asked Councillor Rock about the definition of agricultural land, and he referred me back to the expert report. Could you clarify for me, please, why you consider it agricultural land if the expert that we have referred to is saying that it's not agricultural land? I'd like to understand the definition of agricultural land. Who's right? Thank you.
So I'll take the first question, Stuart will take the second. In terms of the hardcore which has been brought onto the site, doesn't form part of this application, so it's not something we're considering. Enforcement have been involved, as has been identified by the ward member and parish council for some time, and they're satisfied that there's no breach in respect of hardcore. I understand it's to do with laying services, but that's just my understanding. They don't need planning permission for it, so we don't have the details of it.
In terms of the use of the site, so the legal plan and the use of the site is agriculture. The proposed description of the development is a change of use from agricultural to equestrian. We're satisfied that the existing use is agriculture.
And if I can just add to that, it's not for Kernans to determine the land use of the site. That's for us as planners. So there's been no change of use on the site, so it's agricultural.
Yeah, thank you. Just a follow-up question to your response to me in respect of the waste, Alice. If it was to be an illegal deposition of waste, would we be able to seek removal of that material? Do you know?
It's not a relevant question, if I'm honest, because we haven't confirmed that to be the case here. So that I would be commenting on something separate. But, you know, county council deal with waste applications and the deposition of waste. So it would be over to them to do whatever they're able to do in their powers. But we're satisfied that there's been no breach. It's not for consideration here. So to my mind, that's not relevant.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Henry-Serafin.
Hi. Can you please confirm that you need planning permission to remove such hedges? Has there been an application from this applicant about removing hedges?
So the removal of hedging and vegetation to the southern boundary of the site has been fully addressed in the report. There are TPOs along that southern boundary. The council's enforcement team was involved in looking at the removal of the hedging. They were satisfied that no breach has taken place and that the 3 TPO trees remain on site.
Okay.
Councillor Parry.
Thank you. Good evening, Chair and planning officers. Could I have some, excuse me, clarification on AS10 paragraph F, equine and equestrian related activities wherever practical using existing buildings and structures? Would the landscape of the hardcore be clarified as an existing structure? And therefore, if Kernans are saying that the landscape is not appropriate, what weight should we be therefore giving to paragraph F, which refers to using basically existing structures, and on that basis the land is covered in hardcore, which is not considered appropriate for equestrian activity? I do have another question, Chair.
Can I just confirm that the part of AS10 you're referring to is actually R, equine and equestrian related activities wherever practicable?
Yes,
Don't worry, I just wanted to check before I assumed.
the last one.
Yeah. So obviously, like you say, it states wherever practicable using existing buildings and structures. There isn't an existing building on site. Any hardcore that's been laid wouldn't be regarded as a structure in terms of AS10R. So that's why, in officer's view, there isn't an existing building that could be used as opposed to the one that's proposed.
Question was in connection with the condition you're recommending under 4, how the stables, if we were minded to grant, makes all sorts of reference that the site can't be used for any trade, business, commercial riding, livery, use or any other commercial equestrian enterprise. Would it be appropriate to add to this paragraph saying nor residential use stroke caravans? Because obviously, you know, it's saying it can't be used for commercial equestrian or trade or business, and would it be unreasonable to say that it couldn't be used for residential caravans or any form of overnight residential accommodation, i.e. camping or anything like that? Thank you.
So we as officers have to, when putting conditions on planning applications, they have to meet the 6 tests that are in the NPPF. One of them is, the first one actually is, are they necessary? The application does not propose any residential use. As such, it wouldn't be necessary to discount a residential use when that's not proposed. If any future use of the site, if permission were granted and any future use of the site was outside of what is permitted, then that then becomes a matter for the council's enforcement team to deal with.
Any further points of clarification? Councillor Harding.
Thank you. Following on from Councillor Hencher-Serafin's point about the hedging, core strategy, that's not hardcore strategy, CS6, seeking to avoid negative impacts on biodiversity. Looking at that fencing that's been put round the site with a solid concrete base to it, that's not particularly encouraging for wildlife, particularly hedgehogs and low-level wildlife like that. It's all the way around the site, so I'm a bit surprised that we don't have a...
Councillor Harding, sorry, you can just round it off as a form for question.
Yes, yeah. Coming to that. So I'm a bit surprised that we don't have a condition proposed in the planning permission to require them to put some hedging back and to put some spaces underneath those fences to make it more wildlife friendly. Could that be looked at?
So as set out on page 12 of your report, the fence isn't for consideration. It's not proposed within the application, so the impacts of the fence aren't for consideration under this application. However, what I will say is County Ecology have been consulted on the application, and I understand have not recommended... No, have raised... So page 5 of your agenda, they've raised no objection. Which we can't consider because planning permission isn't sought for it under this application.
Councillor Keithley.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'm coming on to conditions, actually, a question about conditions. And I've just heard a question from Councillor Parry about adding a condition in respect of residential accommodation, and case officer said one of the tests is it necessary? Within the application, on page 11 under highways matters, the third paragraph states that a private equestrian use at this location is not considered to generate sufficient traffic and vehicular trips to have a detrimental impact on parking provision or the highway network. I'm going to ask you a question as to whether or not it is necessary to apply a limit on the traffic movements into and out of this site. Is it necessary to do that to make sure that the use of the site is in line with what's proposed, which is private equestrian use, and not some other use potentially?
Although it's a different question to what Councillor Parry asked, it's very much the same response. It wouldn't be necessary. Highways are satisfied that a private use of the site for equestrian wouldn't generate sufficient traffic and vehicle trips. They haven't proposed a condition regarding vehicular trips of the site. So, you know, we as officers wouldn't consider that necessary, no.
Yeah, thanks, Stuart. I think there's a bit of a difference for me. This application doesn't consider residential accommodation. It's not included in the application. What is included in the application is a private equestrian use, and highways have specifically identified that that particular use only generates a certain amount of traffic. So what I'm suggesting is to you, can we consider it necessary to apply a restriction on the amount of traffic to ensure that it doesn't, the scope of this doesn't grow beyond private equestrian use? That's the question I'm asking.
I'd answer with 2 points. Firstly, just to reiterate what Stuart said, County Highways haven't requested it. They're satisfied that a private condition is sufficient. Secondly, we wouldn't know where to begin in terms of, as you know, non-highways officers, what level of trip is appropriate for a private stables accommodation. Highways are satisfied, as officers are, that that condition is sufficient to ensure that the trip generation is appropriate for the site, bearing in mind that it's a 0.52 hectare size site and 2 stables are proposed. It's not significant, and in light of that, it wouldn't meet the tests of necessity or reasonableness.
I have a question similarly on the subject of conditions, but on different ones. 2 were raised as potentials by our speakers tonight. One was to have the land be restored to agricultural use, presumably after, if this weren't being used by the applicant for the use of horses. And I just wondered whether that was something that could be considered. And the other one was whether it could be conditioned to be suitable for horses, presumably 1 horse, given the outcome of the Kernan's report, given the size available, and effectively as an extension of condition 4 as it stands, noting that it is for the keeping and exercising of horses. Is that something that we could consider as something that could effectively then be enforceable should it be determined unsuitable?
In respect of the first condition, I don't know whether I've misunderstood or it's been worded not quite as expected, but obviously talking about remediating it back to agricultural use, obviously what they're proposing here is to use the site for equestrian. So I don't think that is kind of appropriate. I think what I've grappled from the other kind of discussion is whether it would be reasonable to put a condition on requiring some sort of remediation of the land to make it suitable for horses, as is a concern raised by Kernan's. Officer's view is that again wouldn't meet the tests set out as required in terms of conditions. We're starting to stray into the welfare of horses, which is considered by other legislation. We don't have a development plan policy which talks about the welfare of horses or welfare of animals. I think one of the speakers referred to SAFE in terms of CS9. That's very clearly relating to people. So again, I don't think that gives us a hook to require a condition to remediate the site. Obviously, if members think differently and do think such a condition would meet the tests, then that's within your gift to add that, if minded to grant.
Thank you. No, I appreciate that. Councillor Parry.
Thank you, Chair. I just wonder whether I could come back and ask for officers' clarification with regard to CS9 design and distinctiveness, which was raised by Councillor Rock earlier, because the design and distinctiveness of the site is the Kernan's report infers that the site is not suitable for equine activity at the moment, and therefore how much weight can we give to CS9 on the basis of design and distinctiveness? Because obviously if the site isn't suitable for what the planning application we have before us, then it therefore contravenes CS9. Could I have some clarification on that, please, Alice? Thank you.
I completely see where you're coming from in your comments. Officer's view is that it remains that the welfare of horses is not a material planning consideration which would justify the refusal of the application. There's other legislation such as the Animal Welfare Act 2006, and in light of that, just because it passes planning tests doesn't necessarily mean it passes all legislation, and we've got to be quite careful to make sure we're determining an application in line with planning legislation and planning policies. So my advice would be that you'd be in sticky territory if you were to kind of look to refuse on not complying with CS9, because we're talking about an animal welfare issue rather than a safe community for people.
Any further points of clarification? In which case we can move to debate. Who would like to start? Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chairman. It's always a bit of a challenge to take on an officer when they've come forward with a recommendation which I don't tend to agree with. And I'd like to set out my rationale for a position of wanting to refuse this so that other councillors can use it as an Aunt Sally if they want. The last time we discussed this application, there was a general sentiment which was not in favour, and we asked for the specialist report. And we now got a specialist report. And just as an aside, we had a decision last week on an appeal where an officer made a decision which went against a specialist report in relation to an exceptional house. So I think if we ignore the views of specialists when we've asked for their view, there's a risk. I note that in the report, apart from paragraph 29, the Kernan report says the size of the site is not suitable for the proposed use. That seems to me to be a fairly straightforward statement. The paragraph that took my eye was paragraph 26. Within the Code of Practice for the Welfare of Horses, Ponies, Donkeys and Hybrids, pursuant to section 15 of the Animal Welfare Act 2006, it states that 0.5 to 1 hectare should be provided per horse for grazing. So here we have an application for 2 stables. The update sheet says that the intention is to graze 1 Clydesdale horse. Don't think you can get much bigger than a Clydesdale. If all you wanted was 1 Clydesdale, why would you ask for permission for 2 stables? So I infer that the assumption that it is reasonable to anticipate that at some point, if this were permitted, that 2 horses would be grazed on the site. That would contravene this question of the Animal Welfare Act because either by a quarter or by a factor of 4, the site is inadequate size. It's either 0.52 or 0.51, when the requirement for 2 horses would be between 1 and 2 hectares. So it is demonstrably not the right size. I take the point that this is a piece of animal welfare legislation, and how do you link it into the planning regulations and policies in order to provide an adequate hook to refuse? Well, my hook is AS10, which provides a 3-legged test in the penultimate paragraph, which says all other types of development or activity in the countryside, unless covered by a specific policy in the core strategy, will need to be fully justified, offer significant benefits to the local area, and not be contrary to the overall development strategy for the district. You have to satisfy all 3 legs of that test in order to comply. My contention would be that this site, by virtue of its size in relation to 2 stables for 2 horses, and we haven't mentioned the question of the health and safety issues about the tack room and whether it's got a glass in and horses kicking, etc., etc. But purely on the grounds of size, my contention would be that this application is not fully justified to provide adequate space for the use and suitability for 2 horses in 2 stables on that site. So I am minded, unless somebody can really pick holes, and I'm sure they can, if I'm currently minded to propose refuse. I know I have in the past been minded to propose and again been ticked off for not having actually proposed. So I understand the difference. But I'll wait to hear the discussion with interest.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Who would like to go next? Councillor Henry.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Well, I'm impressed with Mr. Harvey. He's done his work correctly, and I agree with more or less every word he said. This site is definitely not fit for purpose, and to put hardcore on a site and glass and pottery is going to come to the surface, and it's not suitable for animals at all. And as Councillor Harvey says, the area of the site is not large enough. So I will second Councillor Harvey's proposal to refuse.
Just for clarity, at the moment it's not been proposed. He's just made a position that he's willing to propose in the future, but we'll come round to that in due course. Councillor Fleming.
I've been sitting here for the last 15 minutes listening to all the arguments. I own 5 horses, I've done for 40 years, not the same ones. And I remember the pictures that came up the last time we proposed this. Now, as Peter said a few minutes ago about glass and whatever, I know animal welfare is not part of this, but that land will not sustain any horse at any level. And I just can't work out how, from a technical perspective, the officer's proposing to grant this when it's clearly not a grazing pasture. So from that perspective, whoever proposes to go against this, I'll be supporting them.
Thank you, Councillor. Who would like to go? Councillor Passingham.
Well, I was minded to support the application on the grounds that I know that hardcore land can be reclaimed as good land, because I have experience of that, and that it's not ideal. So I was minded to support it. But I too agree with Councillor Harvey's argument that in terms of animal welfare, if it's not a big enough grazing area for a horse, then we shouldn't be supporting it.
Thank you. I'll just come in at this point. I certainly agree with the sentiment on this, and I don't want to stifle debate. I do have a concern, though, that we have to be absolutely clear at the basis on which we are making a decision tonight, which is the development plan that we have adopted as the local planning authority, and that we can't go outside the borders of that and within reason to make our determinations. That includes the current state of land, because what we're talking about here is lawful use, not necessarily the current use. So that's why, particularly when looking at things like its use as agriculture, I agree that it's not being farmed at the moment. I also agree with the Kern's report that it's not suitable for horses because they are the professionals on this. That being said, that's not our determination to make. It's about the legal use of the land. I'm certainly intrigued by Councillor Harvey's argument. I'd be intrigued to explore that with the officers for some clarification on what we can find by way of justification, because as I said, I have a certain sympathy with that argument. But I just want to be absolutely clear, we cannot stray outside of the lines on the basis of desire. We have to be very careful about that. Councillor Harvey.
Thank you. I understand the need for caution, and I totally accept that we have to root any rejection in the core strategy. I come back to my central point that AS10, for this exceptional item which doesn't meet any other criteria, has to pass the 3-legged test, the first one of which is that it has to be, not my words, fully justified. I think the expert opinion we have got suggests that this application is not fully justified. And on that basis, I will now propose formally that we refuse this application.
Thank you. Noted. I will come to other speakers in the debate, but I'm keen to hear from our officers on this point, if possible.
Thank you, Chair. So, as you know, AS10 lists the forms of development which are acceptable in principle in countryside and village locations. Where a development doesn't meet one of those listed criteria, which go from A to V, that's when we turn to the penultimate paragraph of AS10. It states all other types of development or activity in the countryside, unless covered by a specific policy, will need to be fully justified, offer significant benefits, and not be contrary to the overall development strategy for the district. The issue here is the proposal is clearly covered under AS10R, which talks about equestrian development. So at AS10R, the core strategy supports in countryside locations such as this equine and equestrian-related activities wherever practicable using existing buildings and structures. In terms of then the development management considerations, which helps us with the interpretation of that, the only additional test which that requires is in relation to Part R, so again, equestrian and equine development, specific consideration will be given to the extent to which roads would be used by horses and the impact this would have on other road users. So it doesn't require any specific test in terms of justifying the need for it. They don't have to demonstrate significant public benefits. My advice to you is that the penultimate paragraph of AS10 isn't relevant, and if you were to engage it and refuse the application on that basis, we would be at risk of costs at appeal.
Thank you, Alice.
Can I
if you'd like
respond on that? I take that point. I withdraw my recommendation to refuse.
Thank you. Councillor Parry.
Thank you, Chair. I think everyone round the table is of the view that we don't like what we have in front of us. And I think we've spent the last half an hour trying to look for material reasons that would stand up at appeal to refuse. We have debated it quite extensively. We've asked the officers of relevant questions. I am totally sympathetic with the parish council and also Councillor Rock, but unfortunately we have to go with what we have in front of us and with policy. I, for one, I've tried really hard to find a material planning reason to refuse this. I can't find one that will stand up, and it is therefore with regret I will be going, and I'm happy to propose that we go with the officer's recommendation. And apologies to every members of the public for saying that, but I cannot find a material planning reason that will stand up. But I do think if this gets granted, the parish council and the local villagers have got to watch the site like hawks. And as soon as there's a problem, we get enforcement onto it, because I can see this site potentially being used as a traveller site. I rest my case, but I do propose. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I think the next person I had on my list was Councillor Keithley.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. I mean, it's an extremely difficult situation, this, and I think the case officer's done a good job. I think it's unfortunate that animal welfare is not currently accorded any consideration in the planning process, and I know the PCA have sort of lobbied government to try and align things, but they haven't been able to. I must admit, I've listened to what Councillor Harvey said. I liked what he said, actually. I'm a little bit confused as to AS10 paragraph R. I've just heard the Alice say that it related to equestrian use and the use of existing structures. And why I'm a little bit confused at the moment is that there is no, in my view, existing structure to use. So I'm still questioning that in my mind, and whether or not that could be clarified for me again, that would be helpful.
So the wording of the policy states that basically the forms of development which will be acceptable in countryside and village locations are equine and equestrian related activities wherever practicable using existing buildings and structures. So the intent of that is that if there's an existing structure on site, we'd rather you reuse that for stabling. If it's not practicable, i.e. there isn't an existing building on site, that doesn't preclude a new build stable building.
Councillor Home.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just wanted to support Councillor Parry's acceptance of the application. Yeah, regretfully, I think unfortunately we tried very hard. That we personally don't seem particularly happy with it, but there doesn't seem to be any relevant policy that could be justified to reject it. So yeah, I'm happy to second.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Harvey.
Can I try these out on the officers? The wording of AS10 before it lists the sections down to R, starts off, the following forms of development and uses in the countryside are acceptable in principle. Equine related activities, dee-da. The question for me is, where does practice, the practicalities of this site, the recommendation that there's need for at least a hectare, if not 2 hectares for 2 horses, means, can it be construed in such a way that is watertight? That although the principle might be accepted, in this particular case, the practicalities of this site are such that it merits refusal.
I would ask you to find a policy where it requires that the practicalities are a material planning consideration. You know, we've got the principle which has been established for the reasons we've set out. The next question, I think, which is probably most tightly related to in terms of material planning consideration, is design, which came up earlier from Councillor Parry. And again, our advice, or my advice, is that we'd be on a sticky wicket to refuse it on design when Kernans have said the design of the stable is appropriate. I take the point on the extent of grazing, but again, I just can't see where there's that policy hook to give us justification to refuse.
Yeah, thank you. For my part, again, I think the issue we have here is the policy grounds we have with anything to do with equine in the countryside is very thin. It is a sentence. That is an issue with the core strategy, I think we all accept, but that is what we have to determine it on. I would like to think that future plans will be more robust, but you know, that's for the future, and we have to deal with what we have now. On that basis, I think I think we've all had our say. I'm in support of Councillor Parry's proposal for those reasons. Would anyone else like to contribute before we move to a vote? No. Okay. In which case, we have a proposal to grant application in line with officers' recommendations. Can I see all those in favour, please?
8.
Opposed?
1.
And abstentions?
2.
Thank you very much. In which case, committee resolves to grant application 23/01027/FUL. Thank you, everyone. We'll now move on to our next item, item 4, which is application 23/03384/FUL, Rising Fields Farm, Lighthorn Road, Kyneton. And Paul is our presenting officer, so once you're ready, Paul, take it away.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, one and all. If you're enjoying the weather, we are over at a site with which you will be relatively familiar by this point. I think my last appearance at committee, we dealt with another application on what is now an adjoining site. It was a variation of the farmhouse on Rising Fields Farm near Kyneton. This is not that. It is now an independent site. So we're a little way out of Kyneton, which is off to the southeast there. We've got Compton Verney and Combrook off to the west, and JLR up in the northeast. Moving a little closer in, you can see the application site is in red. We have a dark green line, which is not where my mouse cursor is for some reason. But anyway, there's a dark green line that you should be able to see on the screen there. That's public right of way. The pink line, also public footpath. The bridle way, the green line, is actually provides the access to the site. The bright green line is a recently imposed tree preservation order, which the council actually imposed during the determination of the application. See your update sheet. So, this is a scheme founded on a Class Q fallback position, something else with which we're becoming increasingly familiar. In this case, as you can see on the screen there, it's a scheme for 5 dwellings, 4 within one section of the chicken shed on site, the existing chicken shed on site, and the 5th is another bit of the chicken shed, but it's a larger chunk of it. And in the fallback position, part of that chicken shed would have been retained on adjoining land, which would remain in agricultural use. I should say that the poultry farming has ceased on the site. This is what the fallback position would have looked like. It's doffing my cap to Councillor Rock. There may be no ducks here, but if it looks like a chicken shed and smells like a chicken shed, it remains a chicken shed, no matter what you clad it in. As you can see, it's a fairly utilitarian design, very low eaves, very low ridge height, pretty compromised by the constraints of the building. By comparison, with my thanks to the applicant and the agent for providing this comparison drawing, we can see some 3D renders, which obviously the usual caveats apply to those, but we can see that rather than the sheds being retained, effectively we have a L-shaped development of 4 dwellings. That's 4 compared to the 5 of the fallback position, around a courtyard with parking and planting and so forth. Footprint, floor area and volume of development are all decreased compared to the fallback position. There is a little disagreement on the precise numbers, but I'm confident in that in those statements. So that's the comparison. This is in a bit more detail what's actually being proposed here. We can come on to look at some of the benefits of this scheme compared to the fallback position, the case being made. In the top left of that plan, you can see there's some new tree planting off to the left. This is will have a screening function, obviously, screening the development from the west. It will also offset some of the felling that's taken place within the TPO'd area, which is what inspired the TPO, incidentally, and also have benefits for biodiversity. Those biodiversity benefits are augmented by other features. If you've got particularly sharp eyes, you'll be able to see a pond just in the crook of the L there, some wildflower plantings, more trees. These are the general approach there. These are what the dwellings, the 4 new dwellings will look like. There are some slight differences between the plots. But I've only, for the sake of brevity, I'm just going to show the one plot there. Again, we've seen how it's a chicken shed. These are an improvement on a chicken shed, and they are an improvement, to be precise, design-wise, on that. These are slightly older photos now. They're about 5 years old, in fact, when I first visited the site. But it does show the site in operation, which I think is illustrative. Yep, silos. This is roughly where plot 3 is, in the sort of bottom left-hand corner of the site as you look at the site plan. This is a view up towards the site past where the farmhouse will be in due course. And that's from Lighthorn Road, looking back towards the site. You can see there's substantial vegetation between us and the site at that point. I mentioned the update sheet briefly. I must sheepishly draw your attention to a couple of corrections. There's a slight unfinished sentence in the fallback position section, which, after having done the update sheet, I also realised I'm thinking of the fallback position that I dealt with rather than the one that my colleague dealt with in the interim, which is the one that's relevant for this application. So, for the sake of clarity, 5 dwellings, the fallback position, 4 dwellings, this proposal. The 5 dwellings would all be provided within the chicken shed in the fallback position. Here they're spread slightly further out. And relatedly, in the residential amenity section of the report, I've referred to a retained portion of the poultry shed, which was on the plans that we originally got. It isn't the case now. None of the poultry shed, none of the chicken shed is going to be retained. It's all going to be demolished and replaced with these 4 dwellings. So no residential amenity concerns there. Wolfishly, there is the tree preservation order, which I've mentioned. We've covered that. And entirely professionally, there is the Councillor Mills objection. I believe he will expand on that in due course. And Environmental Health have very kindly responded to a belated consultation, so they have no objection to the contamination walkover study. So all that being said, Chair, I've identified a harm of this development, which is that it will be spread across a slightly increased part of the site. That's offset by, in my view, benefits including comprising design, sustainability, biodiversity net gain, landscape and trees, traffic and highway safety, residential amenity and broadband, together with, as I say, a reduction in general amount of development. So on that basis, Chair, I recommend that we grant permission.
Thanks very much, Paul. We'll move on then to our first speaker, who's Councillor David Gosling, Kyneton Parish Council. Good evening, Councillor. Welcome back. You've got 3 minutes in this instance, and yes, button on the right-hand side, and I'm happy to give you a 30-second warning before your time expires.
Could I ask the comparison site drawing to be diagrammatically up there for councillors to see, please? And could I also encourage councillors to have page 27 of your report back in front of you?
Thank you.
So, starting with the perceived benefits as they are listed there, the heading of sustainability, here, as always, I'm afraid I need to take some strong exceptions to the conclusion. I've looked at the whole life carbon assessment and find it amazing and troubling that conclusions are reached by comparing apples and pears, assumptions for the outline permission and greater detail for this full application. One glaring flaw, for example, the carbon emissions calculations are based on space and water heating by air source heat pumps for this proposal, but the barn conversions are assumed to be heated by an all-fired combi boiler. As we all know, there's a significant difference in carbon as well as energy between heat pumps and oil boilers. The officer has, as an experienced planner, I'm sure, understandably relied on information submitted by the applicant. I, on the other hand, am a retired, certainly, accredited energy assessor and can therefore, with some knowledge, look at this and say that attributing significant weight to a sustainability benefit derived from the assessment cannot be substantiated. Under biodiversity, the net gain in habitat and hedgerow, I'd suggest, is a bit of an academic issue. This is a rural area where wildlife has happily coexisted for decades with the existing buildings and in the natural landscape. Any improvements to this would only be necessary to screen the proposed new dwellings, which in turn are not necessary. So if weight must be attributed, I suggest it's perhaps less than moderate. Looking at the harm, one of the several harms that the report states that have not been mitigated is the enlarged area encompassed by this proposal. And I'd really like to draw your attention to those 2 diagrams on the left-hand side. It clearly shows this to not merely development outside the chicken shed footprint, it is crouching significantly further into the agricultural space and open countryside. The officer considers that the increased built envelope allows for much needed placemaking features and the positive contribution to local and landscape character and visual amenity. They're all very good words, but we consider this actually to be a negative contribution far from much needed placemaking, and that therefore it carries significant weight of harm, and for want of a policy, would be contravening policy CS5 of the core strategy. Now, I notice in the update sheet that there is reference to the fact that that final bit of barn is now to be demolished. If it is no longer needed as an agricultural building, and if that had been the case when the change of use application was being considered, maybe that would have been significant demolition and that would have had an impact on the change of use decision. Gentlemen, ladies, it is for your deliberation to decide, but I would hope that you will recognise this is not, this is a new development and therefore should be considered as such as unacceptable outside the built-up area.
Thank you. I'll ask you to wrap it up there.
Thank you.
That's lovely. Thank you very much, Councillor. Members, do you have any questions? Yes, Councillor Harvey.
Councillor Gosling, I note from the plan that we're talking here about 4 single-storey buildings proposed.
Correct.
Can you tell me anything about your most recent housing needs survey and what it said about bungalows, if anything?
Our housing needs survey has always been conducted for dwellings within the built-up area boundary of the village. We've not ever considered whether we want bungalows or detached 4-bedroom houses outside the built-up area boundary.
What I'm trying to elicit from you is not a question of where they are, is what type of houses are required to fulfil the needs of the housing needs survey.
Well, when we did a housing needs survey, there was certainly a request for there to be bungalows, but the barn conversion would also be a single-storey dwelling. So you have 5 single-storey dwellings compared to 4 under this proposal.
Any further questions for our Parish Council representative? No, in which case, thank you very much for your contribution. Our next speaker then is Piers Brooks, agent for the application. Good evening, Mr. Brooks. So it's, yes, the button on the right-hand side. You've also got 3 minutes. I'm happy to give you a 30-second warning before your time expires. Otherwise, when you're ready, take it away.
Thank you, Chair. The reason this application is before committee tonight is due to the objection from the Parish Council. Without this objection, this application would have already been approved under delegated powers and based upon the numerous planning reasons summarised by the officer. With regards to the Parish Council's objection, the formal objection that was submitted, that is, I would like to make 2 key points. Firstly, we listened and responded to the Parish Council's previously stated concern regarding encroachment. And so we proactively worked with the officer to develop a more compact and consolidated courtyard arrangement, as you can see. Incidentally, the scheme does now include the removal of that large section of poultry barn that would have been retained if the Class Q fallback scheme was to be fully implemented. Secondly, we agree that the fundamental planning assessment and decision should come down to what is deemed to be more harmful overall in this location. As noted by the officer, the extant Class Q scheme for 5 dwellings has been commenced and would have a very realistic prospect of being completed within the next 2.5 years. As such, it is a key material consideration in the assessment of this alternative proposal, and especially in light of case law that the officer has outlined in his report. With regards to an application that proposes an alternative form of development following the granting of a Class Q prior approval, this is not uncommon. And in fact, this committee does have prior experience of determining such applications. For instance, the committee approved a very similar replacement scheme for 4 dwellings on a redundant poultry farm near Welford last February. With regards to the assessment of harm, I would like to draw to the committee's attention the following matters of comparison. The proposed scheme does deliver a net reduction from 5 to 4 in a consolidated courtyard arrangement. The proposed scheme yields a reduction in footprint of 30%, a reduction in floor space of 33%, a reduction in built volume of 20%. All these metrics are based upon the removal of the residual section of the poultry barn, as indicated. In addition, it delivers a 33% net gain in biodiversity, which is achieved via the extensive native planting, including the new section of woodland planting to the west of the site. Furthermore, the officer has listed a number of other benefits in their report, including design, residential amenity, landscaping, highways, sustainability, all of which will be subject to planning conditions and therefore control. Therefore, it is evident that the proposed development before you is considerably better and so less harmful than the Class Q fallback that can still be lawfully built out if required. As such, we respectfully request the committee grant permission in line with the officer's recommendation. I will also add another point that the works to remove trees in the area of tree belt to the north is outside our applicant's ownership and not under their control. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Members, do we have any questions for our agent? Councillor Keighley?
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. Thank you for that. I've just got a question to you about the fallback position of the existing chicken shed. The officer's report suggests that the building's really low. And the eaves height is 1.5 metres. I'm just interested to know what floor space have you got that would comply with a normal regulation for a ceiling height of, say, 2.4 metres, something like that?
Thank you, Councillor. I don't have the drawings to hand. I believe that the eaves height internally in the converted scheme, if it was to come forward, is about 1.6 metres. That doesn't preclude it being used or approved, say, under the Class Q, as it was. So floor space is floor space in that regard. It can still be used, and it does still form part of the floor plan under the Class Q fallback position. Does that answer your question?
I think so, yeah. Thanks.
Any further questions? I've one. I suppose it's just with regards landscape and some other aspects. A couple of the benefits that we've seen listed from the officer's report relate to, say, biodiversity gain, landscape with relation to the planting of trees, and broadband being introduced to the new scheme. Are these not aspects that could be applied irrespectively to the extant Class Q? And if so, would you not be looking to install those as a matter of course?
I think it's important to get across that the Class Q is limited in its scope. So it doesn't ask for biodiversity net gains. It doesn't ask for provision of even storage sheds for cycles, things like that, bin storage. It is very restricted and limited based on national prescribed requirements. The fact is that exists now on this site. It has been implemented. A section of the poultry barn has been removed in order to make a commencement, and it will be built out if required. In terms of needing or wanting to put extra planting in, that is completely the discretion of the applicant for the benefit of the occupants. And touching on the point that was made regarding energy, you can appreciate as a developer approaching this site, if all you can do is convert one large redundant poultry barn, that's all you can do, then there's no real merit or requirement necessarily to install air source heat pumps. You do what is required to sell them, to the open market. So there's a bit of a prudent approach to be taken in terms of what's likely to happen. As it happens, what the applicant would like to do is deliver a better proposal for the site that ticks lots of different boxes, and as such, they will be desirable. They will require...
Thank you. I think you've answered my question. Thank you very much. Any further questions? No? In which case, I think that's everything. Thank you very much. Right, we now move on then to our final speaker for this item, Ward Member Councillor Mills. Good evening, Councillor. Good evening. You do know the drill. I'm happy to give you a 30-second warning. Otherwise, when you're ready, take it away.
Good evening, committee. You will not be surprised to know that I'm very concerned by this proposal and by the wider context for many more barn conversion applications if the style of this one is approved. Before commenting on the detail of the proposal, I note that the officer rightly advises you there have been 2 comments of support, saying they are from neighbours. In fact, one lives in Leicestershire, and the other is the person who originally owned the chicken and egg business before selling off the land and buildings. The wordings of the letter is almost identical, and I will leave it to you to decide on the weight given to either or both. Just now turning to a couple of substantial issues, the design. The architectural merits of the proposed new dwellings are not in question. However, the existing barn has been part of our landscape for decades,
to suggest it should be demolished in favour of unneeded new build dwellings because they look nicer is not a strong argument against the change of use approved scheme. The NPPF does not, as suggested in the officer report, direct that this benefit should be given substantial weight. In fact, paragraph 139B encourages, and I quote, outstanding or innovative design which promote high levels of sustainability or help raise the standard of design more generally in an area, so long as they fit in with the overall form and layout of their surroundings, end of quote. Surely the existing agricultural buildings are the overall form and layout of the surroundings. Demolishing them and replacing them with modern design dwellings does not positively contribute to the character of the locality when compared to the Class Q approval. The proposal creates visual detrimental harm to the character of the existing defined rural location and the appearance of open countryside. This will be more harmful in planning terms when compared to the approved change of use. I'm sure that when you individually visited the site, you have seen you have noticed it is a rural location. I conclude that rather than giving significant weight as a benefit to support the proposal, it should be considered as a disbenefit carrying significant weight. You may be slightly surprised by my reasoning. I confess that some of the wording has been taken almost verbatim from a similar application for a development barely 2 fields away from the one you are considering tonight, and it was refused by one of our planning officers for this and several other reasons. Now, just go on to landscape and trees. The scale and contribution afforded by the additional planting only arises because of the need to conceal this unnecessary and unwanted proposal. This landscape has happily existed for decades of activity as a chicken farm. The proposed additional planting contributing to biodiversity is irrelevant. However, if you are concerned that a few extra trees will be lost if this application is refused, can I remind you that Kyneton has already planted more than 200 new trees using Warwickshire County Council and Woodland Trust support. I can personally testify to these eco-gains since I was part of the group of volunteers who planted them. My silver spade, I can tell you, was well used. I urge you to think about the need for this particular application, also the consequences which may follow if you approve it. Do not be swayed by the risk of being appealed if you refuse the application. The current administration has stated that planning will no longer be developer-led. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you very much. Well within your time. Members, do we have any questions for our ward member? No, nothing forthcoming. Thank you very much, Councillor Mills.
Thanks, Chair.
Right then, we move on to points of clarification from our officers. Any points of clarification we want raised? No, all clear? Oh, just in the last second, Councillor Keithley.
Sorry, thank you. Just coming at the last minute there, Paul, before he moves on so quickly. I just really wanted to better understand the issue of this additional harm that comes from the footprint of the development being quite a bit greater than the existing chicken shed. Can you just elaborate for me so I understand the weight that you've given to that and weighed that against the benefits that you see?
Certainly, Councillor. This is points for clarification, so I will clarify the actual footprint, the developed footprint of the site is smaller as a result of this scheme compared to the fallback position. However, it is true to say that buildings will cover a greater area, if I can put it that way. They will be spread out across a wider area. There will just be less of them, if you like. It's debatable whether it's a harm, to be honest. I think having development spread across a wider area is potentially harmful. But I've found it warrants limited weight simply because that's having a block of development isn't necessarily preferable to having smaller blocks of development spread out. I think it's always a balancing exercise, but that's how I came to that weighting at least.
If I can add to that, I think it's fair to say that a wider spread inevitably leads to further encroachment into the countryside, which is something we seek to resist, which I think is why it's fair to say that it is harmful. However, the point for us as decision makers is not just to look at one single aspect and base a decision on that, but to look at it in the round and holistically, and that's how the case officer has done that in the report. But I just wanted to kind of add that bit of extra information in terms of encroachment.
Any further points of clarification? I have one hopefully quick one. It was in relation to the question I asked of the agent, just because we have some aspects which are considered benefits, which, you correct me if I'm wrong, some of them may have extant permission, as it were, in terms of improving biodiversity and planting trees, things they could do now anyway. Is the fact that we can condition those as a requirement by default benefit to the fact that they just could be done with the extant permission? I mean, it seems logical, but if they are as already able to be enacted, is there a tangible benefit to that, to the fact that we can just add them on as a condition?
Yeah, that's a good question, Chair. I've tried to address this in the weighting I've given to each consideration in terms of how much they could be delivered through the Class Q, how much their basic expectations of any new development as opposed to sort of gains, and also to try and quantify them to some degree. So your point is absolutely correct. You can secure some of these benefits that may or may not have been supplied with the Class Q scheme. You can secure them with conditions and be absolutely sure of them. You can't really call something a planning gain unless it is nailed down with conditions and enforceable. And for those that aren't securable that way through the Class Q, they're the ones I've given the most weight. And the lesser ones, that, as broadband is a pretty good example, it is a benefit. We can secure it with a condition, but nobody's likely to buy a home without broadband. So it's a pretty limited weight applied to that.
Thank you, Paul. Any further points of clarification? No, in which case we can move to debate. Who would like to start? Councillor Holmes.
Thank you, Chair. So I agree with the officer's report that that the new proposal on balance is considerably better than the Class Q fallback, and that, yeah, I agree that the significant weight has been given to the new proposed buildings in that their design is much better than the fallback, and looking at the biodiversity gain as well. And I think on balance, I'd like to propose that this committee grants the application.
Thank you very much. Councillor Keithley.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think very simplistically for me, there are serious limitations of converting the existing chicken shed into homes. I'm fairly convinced that the fallback position is buildable, but it's going to be ugly and one big block, and it's going to be less practical for residents. I listened to what the case officer said about weighing up the harm of the development over a larger area, but the actual buildings are smaller, better spread out. We can condition the benefits that are to come, which you're not going to be able to do with Class Q, which is a fallback position. So I think, whilst I can understand the reluctance to support it locally because it feels like more buildings and extending the built-up area, I think it's a better solution personally, and I'd rather see a better solution than what I consider to be a low-grade solution of a conversion of a very low barn. So I'm happy to second a proposal made by Councillor Holmes.
Thank you very much. Councillor Parry.
Thank you, Chair. I am minded to support this application on a couple of other reasons. The committee, we had something very similar, similar circumstances on a poultry farm in Welford, and I think it's very important that we have consistency in our decision making. But I would like to, I've just seen it on the other page. I was going to ask for permitted development rights to be removed, but I can see it's actually there. I was looking at on the other page. So yes, I think the actual aesthetic feel is far more desirable, and it ticks a lot of boxes. Regrettably, this is often a route of getting homes in the countryside via going through the class Q, and I have totally understand where the parish council is concerned, and particularly this site in terms of the number of other proposals we've had. They've spent an awful lot of time putting in planning applications. So, but from a material planning reason, I actually think with the reduced floor space and its design, it will actually be it's a much better proposition than the Class Q, which I hasten to add is never very unusual, because, you know, I think the problem relies in how the Class Q has come about that takes this to stage 2. But I am happy to support the officer's recommendation, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Anyone else like to contribute to debate? No, I mean, I think I was slightly on the fence going in, just because I certainly sympathise with where the ward member and parish council come from on this, in terms of developing in the countryside. But yeah, the comments you've made and the clarifications we've had have solidified my my support for it for the same reasons. Okay, well, in that case, we can move to the vote. We have a proposal to grant in line with officers' recommendations. Can I see all those in favour, please?
10.
Opposed?
None.
And abstentions?
1.
Thank you very much, in which case committee resolves to grant application 23/03384/FUL. Moving swiftly on, I'll note at this point that our final item for this evening was removed from the agenda earlier in the run-up to the meeting. So our next item is our final item for this evening, which is application TPO/201/135 SDC 739, Fieldings, Alveston Lane, Alveston. And our presenting officer is Josh. When you're ready, take it away.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everyone. The site subject to the preliminary TPO is identified by the black dot on this map. This plan shows the TPO sites in relation to the Alveston Conservation Area to the east, illustrated by the purple line, and the public right-of-way, illustrated by the dashed green line. A planning application for a replacement dwelling was submitted to the council for the Fielding site. The proposal sought to erect a much larger replacement dwelling, and the works involved compromised the root protection areas of a number of trees on site, and in addition to this, proposal sought to remove an oak tree classified as A2. Due to the proposed removal of such a high quality tree, myself as case officer visited the site accompanied with an SDC forestry and landscape officer, which identified a number of trees potentially worthy of TPO, and the decision was made to serve the TPO as a preliminary status. Due to the time constraints, the preliminary TPO was served as 7 trees on site. This allowed SDC officers time to review the tree's quality in detail without threat of removal. The planning application was subsequently withdrawn for reasons including, but not limited to, the harm caused to the trees on site. Notwithstanding the withdrawal of the planning application, the trees were initially covered by the TPO were thought to be candidates for protection. Having visited the site a second time, STC officers reviewed the trees initially TPO'd and concluded that 3 of the trees initially covered were not worthy of protection and should be removed from the TPO. A detailed summary of the review of all 7 trees is in the committee report. The plan shows 4 trees to be retained under the recommended modified TPO, circled in red, and 3 trees to be removed from the TPO, circled in green. The reason this TPO is before Planning Committee is because the arboricultural consultant working on behalf of the applicant for the planning application objected to the serving of the TPO. Details of this objection and SDC's response is detailed in the committee report. The Council notes the submission of a new application for the site for a replacement dwelling, which is currently pending consideration, but intends to retain all 7 trees on site, but we can't provide comment of whether any harm to the trees on site is acceptable. It is recommended that members confirm the modified TPO. So these are photos of the TPO site from within the Alveston Conservation Area, highlighting the amenity value of the trees. These are the photos looking towards the Alveston Conservation Area. The following photos are the 4 trees proposed to be covered by the recommended TPO. These are photos of the oak tree, which is classified as A2, which is the proposed replacement dwelling intended to remove in the previously withdrawn planning application. These are photos of the walnut tree, classified as B1. These are photos of the first Norway spruce, classified as B1. These are photos of the second Norway spruce, classified as B1. Officer's recommendation to members is for the TPO to be modified to cover the 4 trees, being 1 oak, 1 walnut and 2 Norway spruce, and to confirm the modified TPO. And that's the end of the presentation. Thank you, Chair.
Right, thank you very much. Sorry, words in my ears. Right. Okay, members, sorry, we've not got any speakers on this one, so are there any points of clarification we'd like to raise before we move to the debate? I'm happy to start the debate and suggest we confirm the order as made.
Second.
As modified, pardon me. Seconded by Councillor Harvey. Anyone on that? Jolly good. In which yeah, we have a proposal which has been seconded. Can I please see all those in favour? Thank you very much. In which case, committee resolves that TPO/201/135 SDC 739 is made as amended. I think that's it. Any urgent business? In which case, meeting's closed. Thank you very much.